Hello, welcome to Volteface TV. In this video, we're going to be going over the German government's revised model for cannabis legalization. They held a press conference today in which they finally gave us more details and information about their proposed model for legalization. So in this video, we're just going to break down some of that information. Tomorrow, we're doing a much longer analysis, debate and discussion as to whether this is a good thing for the industry, whether it's a step backwards or whether it's somewhere in between. So stay tuned for more analysis and content on this. But in this video, we're just going to give you the main talking points, the main highlights from today's press conference. So the first thing I find interesting about today's press conference is it's a confirmation really that there has been some tension between Germany and the EU. Lauterbach said that Germany needed to go back to the drawing board for a more pragmatic approach so that they don't come into conflict with the EU. And I think that's interesting. We kind of knew that there was some tension anyway, but I think it's fairly safe to say now that this new proposed model wasn't the initial idea and concept, the initial policy that Germany put on the table. I mean, if you think back to that first proposal that the German government put on the table, it was quite clear that that involved the commercialization of cannabis as a recreational drug. You know, they talked in there about supply chains coming into the country, about German cultivation licenses, about there being shops and retail, THC limits, all this sort of thing. So it's clear that's been adapted and changed to satisfy the EU. And instead they've kind of separated their policy into two different areas, two separate pieces of work, two separate pillars. Everyone's using the pillars word online. It's probably appropriate here. The first pillar is a set of policies which the German government seem very confident they can just implement and roll out fairly quickly. It's nothing that interferes or conflicts with EU law. And that first pillar really is about, in how Lauterbach framed it today, was about addressing the illicit market. He used the word clean cannabis, about creating more clean cannabis. That's not a word that I would use, but he's clearly talking about how they want to see a reduction in illicit use and provide people with a safer supply and a legal supply of cannabis through a cannabis club model. Now, there are other countries in Europe that have adopted the cannabis club model, and there's slightly different ways of doing them. We don't have all the details at the moment. What we do know is they're looking at cannabis clubs which have a maximum of 500 members, maximum purchase of 50 grams, and that can be done in 25 grams at a time per club member, and non-club members won't be able to use that club for cannabis. So as more information and details about that model come out, we'll talk about it, and so that's the first pillar, this kind of set up some cannabis clubs, 500 members, create a legal supply of cannabis. The second pillar, Lauterbach kind of described this as a way to bridge the gap to future national legalization. So this essentially, I mean, it's essentially a 5-year pilot scheme. You know, a commercial cannabis chain will take the form of a 5-year regional pilot project, and they hope to gain more space for progressive cannabis policies in Europe during that time. So sounds like quite a strong compromise. We're going to do a 5-year pilot, and in those 5 years, I imagine Germany will plan to feed back to the EU research information about how those pilot projects are going, and not only buy them more time to get the EU comfortable, but also gather some research and evidence so they can support their decision after 5 years goes, here's the pilot, here's the evidence, this is what the next stage looks like. It's quite unclear what the full plans are for that regional pilot, and when asked, officials were unclear and said that specifics would be released after the summer break. So the second pillar still needs to be registered with the EU, and so this might be why we're seeing a little bit of a delay here, because that still needs to be put on the table in front of the EU and said, look, here's our pilot program, this is what we're going to do, and kind of seek approval. I would imagine that negotiations have got to a point which Germany feels confident in doing that. Otherwise, it's doubtful that they would hold a press conference and say, this is our plan, this is what we're going to do. But here they're kind of recognizing that, you know, there's still a process that they need to follow that fits in with EU law. So that's what we know from today's press conference. Interesting stuff. You know, it's clearly not what Germany first had intended to have on the table. They've clearly had to go back to the drawing board and come back with a bit more of a conservative approach to this. It's still a step in the right direction. We've still got a main, you know, a big player in the EU pushing this forward, driving it. They're still taking this very seriously. In tomorrow's show, Katja and I are going to talk in much more detail as to if this is a good thing or a bad thing, and just explore together what this might mean for the industry and just Europe in generally as we continue to see the liberalisation of cannabis policies and drug policies. What does all this mean? So we're going to break that down tomorrow, but today we just wanted to get that information out there and do a video on what was actually said, what we know from the press conference today. So thanks for watching. Really appreciate people's support. Thanks for all the kind comments and support people have been showing for the show and the work that we're doing. Keep an eye on the voltefast.me website for just regular daily cannabis news, drug policy news and content, and stay tuned for Volteface TV for more cannabis and psychedelics debate and discussion. See you next time.